Hey, everybody, what's up? It's your boy MJ. Welcome to the Black Wine Guy Experience. My guest today is a sommelier turned maverick winemaker, Brad Hickey, a Chicago native. Brad got into the wine game while working as a server at Union Square Cafe in the late 90s. From there, Brad became the junior wine guy at Les Spinasse, and a few years later at Cafe Boulud, where he was Daniel's first American-born sommelier. Brad fell in love with South Australia on a buying trip in 2004 and vowed to return. And in 2007, Brad returned for his walkabout, fell in love with his wife, Nicole Thorpe, and they have been championing little-known or outre varietals at their Brash Higgins winery on their patch of dirt in the McLaren Vale. Welcome, Brad.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Right, well, thank you for being here. I know, we had we connected on social media through JD. Shout out to JD Wagner, who's in the house. And he had sent me some of your wines because I'm a sucker for Cinsault. Just kind of, you said you were coming to town. You were going to call me. You did, and we were able to make this happen. Back and forth. Thanks for making it happen, switching appointments around. So glad you're here, man.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that we have other connections too. I remember Charles Lawrence, a winemaker friend of mine in Japan.
Yes.
Charles Sybarite Wino.
Yes.
He was someone else too that I know we've connected through Charles.
Yes. Yeah. He told me about I think he saw the wines like I know him, and I did a IG live with Charles. He's a character.
Yeah, you can imagine an American winemaker, planting his first vineyards in Japan. It's kind of obviously he's pretty obsessed.
Yeah.
Passionate.
Totally. So what wines are we going to be drinking today while we learn all about the Brash Higgins story?
We're going to we make a Zibibbo made in amphora, and so we thought we would try a Greek rendition next to ours as a sort of counterpoint.
Okay.
So after spending a week in New York, I always end up buying a lot of wine as I do the rounds.
Yep.
And so this is a chance to sort of look at a couple of things we picked up. And then also I wanted to give you a splash of Cinsault, since it was something that I know is close to your heart. And if we have time, we have an interesting
we
Grenache.
got time. Just pull out, the Grenache. I'm telling you.
Because Grenache is a good talking point, too.
I love Grenache.
It's not mine, but that's not always. Sometimes I like to drink outside the Brash
Good
Higgins
for you,
universe.
man.
Actually, most of the time I like to drink outside my own wines.
You don't get high on your own supply.
That's true. But you got to keep tasting other people's wines, and that's what keeps it interesting. You keep asking yourself questions.
Yeah, that's so true. I think I don't know if like lay people understand, like even when I was in California, everybody's drinking wines from around the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you make Pinot Noir, you're drinking Burgundy, and then you just drink Northern Rhones and Chardonnay, and you're drinking wines from around the world.
Yep.
That's what winemakers do. I think at the winemakers that you are and that I know, like if you're a huge commercial operation, you don't have to drink outside the box. You just make your 20 million cases. And
it's always interesting when I meet winemakers that aren't interested in food and wine, and they exist. And it's sort of
I know
it's it's a job they got. Maybe they grew up in agriculture and it wasn't their thing.
Yep.
And for me, I come from that background of restaurants and travel and slight hedonistic.
Yep.
And working in New York, obviously, you taste the great wines of the world, and you're not paying for them most of the time. So you're accessing DRC or and high-end Bordeaux's, and then you quit, and then you're like, whoa,
yeah, I know.
what just happened to my drinking, my window just. And then you're like, oh, let's find these. There's a lot of cool bottles under $40.
Exactly.
And then you start making wine, and then I kind of left some of those, like Pinot Noir. I really don't want to make it.
Yeah.
Because I really don't want to sort of spoil it for myself and feel constantly like I'm, benchmarking against great Pinots from the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So certain wines I like to leave to the side and just enjoy without any sort of comparison.
Nice.
Nebbiolo is one of those wines too, where I'm like, let's just leave that to the Piemontese. We don't need to do all of these wines. So there's plenty of options, obviously, in McLaren Vale in South Australia to keep me entertained.
Good.
So, yeah.
Good. So I like to start at the beginning. So you're a Chicagoan. Born and raised in Windy City, or just outside the Windy City? Are you Chicago proper?
Yeah, both. My parents eventually moved up to the North Shore for when I was in high school, so kind of in that sort of Ferris Bueller's Day Off part of the world. So everybody still lives in Chicago. My sister just moved actually to Wisconsin, but for the most part, the family is still in that sort of suburban area up north. So yeah, I've spent my formative years going in and out of the city and enjoying that. And then once I went to college, I actually sort of never really lived and worked in Chicago proper. It's interesting. I just exploded and went other directions, as far away as possible at sometimes. But yeah, definitely been born and raised, and it's still fun to go back to Chicago, even though it's got a little bit more of a bit of a crisis going on there with some of the violence, which is really sad to see that. But yeah, it still is my home in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And when we were doing our little 20 questions warm up, I asked you about food. Who's the chef? Like one of the best. He's an American, but he makes killer Mexican food. What's that guy's name?
Rick Bayless.
Bayless, yes.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
It must be fun to go home to. And also, Chicago's got a huge. I saw, like on a travel show or something, or one of those Andrews and food shows.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's like a Mexican farmers market. Like it's like sick. Like all the regionalities, and you go and you're getting, like it would be like a street festival, like in LA or something, just getting crazy tacos and gorditas and what are the sandwiches? Come on, tortas. Yes.
There's obviously very active Mexican populations all over the U.S.
Yeah.
In Australia, it's few and far between. So
it's kind of far, man. That's a tough hike.
You
can't walk to Australia. That's the problem.
It's an expensive journey. So so you really need to have the native people that bring out the joy.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's usually kind of lame, watered down interpretations. But that's okay, and that's the fun part about coming back to the States for me is getting to enjoy all of that beautiful Mexican food.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, like, what's absence make the heart go fonder? Like, you have a better appreciation. Like, if you had it every day, then you probably wouldn't need it as much. Like, I don't know. But, so you said you went to university. I want to talk about that because I was going through doing the show notes, and I was like, you said University of Wisconsin at Madison, which I had to look at. I'm like, duh, that's the only one. I mean, there's obviously other cities. I was like, no, that's the one.
Mm.
And you played Division I soccer.
I did, yeah. I was pretty good at it. I focused.
Clearly.
I came from actually a football family. My father, like gridiron football.
Okay.
My father was a really successful college quarterback. He ended up playing for University of Illinois.
Mm.
And then, but he was like a real huge hero to me growing up. And how cool my dad was amazing to play catch with, because he'd be throwing these
tight ass spirals.
Yeah, and you'd be doing all kind of Lynn Swan one-handed catches and stuff. And as a kid, you were indestructible. But he was such a hero to me, just because I'm like looking at the newspaper clippings and for some reason he was never pressured me into playing football. I think by the time he got to this highest level, he was kind of burnt out on it, and he's like, just do whatever makes you happy. And I really love soccer. And we played it year round, and so it was very competitive. And I played on some really good teams around the Chicago area. So a huge melting pot of European and other type of kids that grew up there, and that really kind of suited me well and allowed me to compete on Division I level. And then I grew into being a bigger man, like 6'2", and then you can really start playing with the big Scottish fullbacks that are sharpening knives in the back of the. And the little Jamaican midfielders, and then so I just kind of roar through the middle of the field and just create havoc. But yeah, I did a good stint there, and that was really fun to play at that level. Yeah. Yeah,
that's awesome. That's really cool, man. And remind me, or just for our listeners who haven't read your bio, what did you major in while you were there?
I majored in English Lit. I did a honors degree in English Lit, and then sort of a minor in botany. So there was a nice kind of left brain, right brain collision. I remember looking at the curriculum, and I always felt so grateful to be in that sort of higher learning in a university. And Madison had the glorious, buildings and the beautiful campus, and it's right on Lake Mendota. It's on an isthmus, so it's just situated in such a beautiful spot. And I remember just being kind of like giddy about being there, and I really wanted to study the sort of stuff that I thought would help me lead a better life and give me some insight into maybe what I would do with my life once I got out of university. And English was the kind of cool way to read about other, intelligent people writing and discussing those sort of topics. And then the other side was, I'm more interested in the natural world and learning about that capacity and how that kind of plays in. So, it's an interesting sort of duel between the two.
That is actually an interesting combination of to put together.
It sort of serves me well. It's interesting, at the time I wasn't thinking it would made much sense. And of course, if you're an English major, you can constantly get sort of slammed by everybody in your family saying, what are you going to do with that?
You're going to be an English teacher. That's what you're going to do.
Yeah, you're going to be a grade school teacher, or you know, going to work at Stanley Kaplan, and you're just like, hey, just leave me alone. I'll figure it out. And it gave me the courage to go off and travel and say, I'll figure this out. I mean, most kids go to university probably too soon. They're just kids,
I agree.
So, and I like that idea of the year gap year, and at least that, and take some time and go travel and get out of your little ecosystem of your home and your family. And I think that's what I realized. I was in university, but I was like, well, I'm going to get out of this, and I'm probably going to spend a good deal of time traveling and sort of meet some people and see some things, and maybe these experiences, when people talk about young writers, they always say, go experience, build experience, meet people, go out and see the world. And I think that was in the back of my mind through all of that. And then, then all of a sudden you have a background that also includes plants and horticulture. And that kind of now makes perfect sense where I sit now as a grape grower and as a winemaker. So you've got a lot of, and you can talk, you can go into the market and go to restaurants, and you can express yourself, and you can, it's also a nice asset to be able to sell your wines, is to be able to talk about them or do a wine dinner and not, completely.
And I think, and to tell a story more so than just doing what people read in the text sheets. I mean, you're kind of grounded in story, because you said you were going to write the next great American novel. So after you graduated, what did you do? Where did you go?
I went to Paris.
Nice.
And I had a good friend of mine from the soccer team, was a year or two older, and he had moved there to be a teacher, and he offered me a small 6 by 3 foot space on his floor, and that was enough. And so I flew over and crashed on his floor, and then slowly kind of got acclimated and found my own place and got a job. Ironically, working at Chicago Meat Packers, which was a restaurant, like a burger restaurant.
Oh my God! I was gonna say, what kind of?
Yeah, with a slaughterhouse theme. So it was, cattle being led to the slaughter, and the French were okay with that. Clearly it was a little bit, yeah.
Wait, I was trying to was it actually like a cattle yard walking through, or just like, was it video, or was it on the walls? Was there blood on the walls? Like, what is a slaughterhouse theme?
They didn't describe it as a slaughterhouse theme, but Chicago had the history of like the hog butcher of the world, and they had a lot of history of abattoirs, and then so there'd be lots of shots of cattle, lots of pictures, black and white photos of cattle yards, and and it was very surreal because they would play the simulcast of a radio station I used to grow up listening to, like while my mother was ironing. It was like Dick Biondi doing oldies and the Carpenters and all this kind of weird American 1960s music so they loved the fact that I was the Chicago kid, and I was like, young, and like, I was like, really kind of excited to be in the city, and it was so bizarre. But, and so you're learning French and you're getting to know your way around, but you're sort of strangely in this weird Chicago. It lasted about 3 months.
Okay. Yeah.
And I was a busboy, because my French was very, very, but it was a great introduction to getting a job and meeting people in Paris. And then I was able to travel and then come back to Paris and then use it as a base. And then, you could go off and go work in the vineyards in the south of France, go down to Greece, and pick oranges, and then you come back and crash on a friend's couch. And that's what I wanted to do, was develop a group of friends, mostly obviously young people, but different people that we could all kind of support each other. And those are probably my closest friends to this day, are those people that I met during that sort of era. And that was when the Berlin Wall came down. So that was also historically an interesting time. I mean, obviously, I didn't understand all the ramifications of it back then, but it was pretty fun now looking back at that era. So that was 89, 90.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and Paris was great, but it was really an opportunity to visit all the other kind of neighboring cities, and get a little chance to go up into the UK or go down into, Spain or wherever there was an interesting lead, I would go there.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'd hitchhike which was also kind of scary, and you kept pushing yourself and taught myself a lot about becoming self-reliant and, how am I going to make money to do this? And then you would be standing on a corner at sunrise with a bunch of Polish workers, like waiting for some random truck to come by to pick you up
Wow.
for a day's work.
Wow.
You go mix concrete all day or go help a bricklayer or, go work in a field and help clear it. And it was these really kind of almost like Jack Kerouac, these on-the-road type experiences. And it could be, looking back on it, you could have easily just been, caught up into pieces and, tossed into the Aegean.
I know, right?
So trustworthy. But I figured the Polish guys were out there, and
Yeah.
they were, those guys are pretty grizzly, and I wasn't a pushover. So, but that was really scary but exciting when you could get paid, and then you're like, all right, I just made enough money to travel to Crete, and then I can work in an orange grove maybe, and then they're feeding you these beautiful meals, and you're eating fresh oranges, and it's like you're like in this sort of weirdly beautiful scene, even though you're completely removed from what you're used to. And that really, I think, helped me later in life be more confident to take chances, thinking that I'll be able to figure my way out of this. And it's served me really well. That time abroad was absolutely magic.
Yeah, I really love what you said. The self sufficiency, and like how am I going to make money? And I mean, because nowadays, I mean, even before the pandemic, it seems like people don't want to work a little bit, So like,
Yeah.
like kids don't mow lawns anymore.
Mm.
They don't shovel walks. Like when I was growing up, I'm 54. Like we'd take the lawnmower and see if we can cut people's grass. We need money.
Yeah.
Or the winter, we'd go shovel walks.
Yeah.
You don't see that anymore. It does not exist.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a shame.
It is a shame.
So just parents aren't raising? I mean, it has to start somewhere, right?
I guess. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, my family was construction workers. Well, my dad left that to work at the post office, so we always were doing like, masonry, and he did heat and air conditioning. So I kind of grew up around that stuff.
Yeah.
Didn't like to do it, but grateful for it now. Like you said, like so many things. Like
Yeah.
you're in Europe after the fall of after the Berlin Wall comes down.
Yeah.
I mean, looking back, like I mean, there just must have been an air in Europe that you don't know now. But now you're like, wow, you were part of a really historic time.
Yeah. I mean, I had absolutely zero to do with that wall coming down, but now visiting Berlin and being a little bit older and understanding the historical significance
Mhm.
of it, and you spend time in Berlin, and it's haunted by history there, and it's amazing to imagine that even existed 30 years ago. That sort of physical barrier, it's just unreal. So, yeah, I mean, had no idea that was. I remember the soundtrack. It was like some song. Remember that song, "Right Here, Right Now"?
Yep.
I forget the name of the band,
Yeah.
but it was like constantly.
I know the
playing.
song, yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And so after you go on this European adventure and literally kind of working your way through Europe,
Yep.
where'd you land next when you returned home to the U.S.?
I was really, really hungry to travel the U.S. I was excited to be back. I was homesick, obviously, and it was a big leap, even though it was, Europe's not exactly, the craziest place to go, but it was still significantly lonely and hard work
Mhm.
to be welcomed into a city as tricky as Paris, which is very nationalistic in a lot of ways. And as an American, they kind of love you and hate you.
Yeah, everybody knows. We all have our feelings about the French, right?
Yeah. And they think Americans have no culture, but
Exactly.
then they love Prince and
Right,
Michael Jordan
right.
and
now hip hop and Wu Tang and everything. So yeah.
yeah, so you're loved and hated at the same time. And, that idea of not really speaking the language, you never really know what, you're uncomfortable all the time, kind of like, even talking to girls, you're like, I really wish I could talk to you and use the killer, my city sound like, some sort of strange robot. You're preparing your next sentence.
Like none
in
of
your
my
head.
lines are going to work on her. It's just not going to land on Fifi.
Yeah. She's going to see right through
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
For that, you remember that being kind of embarrassed to like speak and people be like, oh, you're
American.
clearly,
Yeah.
you're clearly murdering our language. Why don't you just go home? And then you learn the cute expressions, like "Je parle français comme une vache espagnole," which is like I speak like a Spanish cow. And they go, oh,
And they go, okay, yeah.
oh, you're trying.
Yeah.
You know the old expressions, and then you slowly get your foot in. When I went back home, I wanted to sort of to explore the U.S. I paid off some debt, which was obviously kind of looming from the European adventure. And then a good friend of mine in Europe flew over from Paris, and he'd never been to the States. And so we drove a friend's car from Yale. He was a law student doing an internship in San Diego, and had 2 weeks to drive his car across country, and had, a great experience exploring the U.S., and especially the West, going up through South Dakota and Montana and down through Wyoming and through the Rockies. And then that led to sort of a continual traveling of that whole summer, probably 3 months of crisscrossing the U.S. using auto drive-away cars. I don't know if you remember those. It was a really interesting way to travel. It was a franchise, and most major cities had an auto drive-away business. And if, for example, if you wanted to have your car delivered to Cleveland and you're based in New Jersey, they would offer your car to travelers. They pay the first tank of fuel, and then I would have to deliver it to an address in Cleveland. And then you'd be in Cleveland, and you get your car, and I'd have to figure out how to get it.
That's real ride sharing, kids.
Yeah. So you try to get a car that was modern enough where that full tank of gas would get you almost all the way across the country.
Yeah.
And then you'd pay a couple of, maybe a tank or two of fuel, and you had a great experience, and you got to see the U.S. And did that a little bit back and forth from like New Orleans, all over. Anyways, ended up in Portland, Oregon, and settled in the Northwest. Really liked it. Had a young vibe, a lot of overeducated kids. It was a lot of very chill, a lot of interesting jobs outside of restaurants that I got involved in, like baking bread and brewing beer and things that were, anything possible to stay out of service industry jobs. Worked in a nursery there, like planting trees, and got involved in like a small landscape business I just designed on my own. Had a lot of out-of-work philosophy friends, that, come on, let's go dig some holes for the day. And then, Portland was really cool. That was in the 90s, and had a sense of humor. It was, physically beautiful. Could go to the wineries, and visit and get a little bit of that sort of Pinot Noir in the Willamette Valley and learn about that. And then was a interesting vibe in Portland because it was so chilled that there's an old joke about people go to Portland to retire in their 20s because it's just kind of, the weed is really good and you're just drinking nice beer, and it's like there's not a lot of pressure for and life was good. And I was like,
and it had to be inexpensive. I mean, yeah. Portland was like, I would have to say it was like the shit back in the 90s. Like,
yeah, this is something that everybody from California was moving up to buy land, and there was that kind of land war going on between. So Portland had it had a lot of kind of hippie, liberal, angry hippies, and then it also had like white trash, meth, hillbillies, and then it had, lots of Californians kind of trying to buy land. And I loved it. It was really beautiful, and I rode my bike everywhere, and it was really healthy, and it was really fun. But I felt the sort of magnetism of New York City was looming, and I left Portland in '96 and drove across to New York. Had a friend who was working kind of in glossy magazines, worked for Spin magazine.
I remember Spin.
And he's like, "Come on to New York." He's an old high school friend. He's like, "You can crash with me and my girlfriend, and you got to come here. It's amazing." And so drove across country. I think he was probably surprised I said I'm coming, and then he's like,
"You do a lot of driving across country."
Yeah, that was who wouldn't want to drive? And then he's broke up with his girlfriend, and then I was like, great, so I've got nowhere to stay. And fortunately, I had an air mattress with me, and just would inflate and deflate the air mattress all over Manhattan, so I could stay with somebody, but I just have to blow up the air mattress, and it was all done.
I love that. Like, that's a seasoned traveler. He's got an air mattress. It's like, that's fine. Just got a piece of floor.
Yeah. I got my own mattress, and then my lungs were really strong. It was all done by, orally, just blowing the thing up.
Oh, my God. Remember that?
And I can't tell you how many nights sleeping on that air mattress. But eventually, I got settled into New York a little bit and got a job at Home Restaurant, which was the first restaurant on Cornelia Street. And that was really cool because one of the people who was a regular there lived in an apartment building on Bedford and Downing, right in the West Village. And she's like, "Oh, there's an apartment downstairs, and I'll make an intro if you want to meet the owner." And I was like, "Yeah." Tired of inflating and deflating and living in North Bergen and taking those little vans back and forth and weehawking and so I got this apartment there was a blue ribbon on the corner of Bedford and Downing, and it was a gorgeous little West Village street. And then So I moved into this studio apartment, and I was like living the life. The first 5 years in New York,
That's freaking amazing.
I know.
Yeah.
I had a job. It was $800 a month.
See, that's freaking amazing.
And then 5 years later, after 9/11, she offered it me for like $150,000, and I didn't take it. And I'm thinking,
You should have just bought. See,
I know.
when we were warming up, I said, "What advice you give your younger self?" Like,
Buy
got to
that
be a
apartment.
crazy investment, dude. You like 150. I mean, like,
right near NYU.
it's a no-brainer.
I know,
You'd
it's
have
probably worth
made
$1 million.
You'd have made $1 million off that off of rent by now, bro.
I know. So
But
that
you live and
haunts me.
learn.
Yeah. You know, it's like for $150,000, I can buy acreage. I can, start making whiskey in Vermont.
I love where your head's at, though.
And then I had to move up to the Upper West Side, which was a whole different vibe.
Yes.
But equally as appreciated. By the latter half of my New York City stay, it was. But anyways, we're jumping way ahead. But that's kind of what I did. I love the Northwest, and then after a while, I kind of felt I wasn't being challenged enough. And
You said reality bites, and I'm gonna get out of here.
yeah. I mean, New York is not for everybody, and I think that was also, as
Yeah.
you know, that's another sort of chapter of
Yep.
your New York City era, and
Yep.
how do you react to a city that is not interested at all in you,
Totally.
does not want to esteem you at all, and you're staring at it from Weehawken on a rooftop, going, "How am I ever going to make anything work in there?"
Yeah.
Because it's just like a burning, impenetrable canyon.
It's a tough town.
I know.
And then when you talk about, but it's so funny now that you talk about like Weehawken, like, you know what you could have bought in Weehawken with a view of New York City back then in the 90s, and now those are all $1.5 million studios. Like, yes, that's why if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. It is a city that is going to keep going no matter what. Can you keep up pace? Can you keep up, and can you accelerate your pace? I love that. So, you mentioned like when you were in Portland, you were doing you baked bread, you got into fermentation, brewed beer. You said anything to avoid hospitality. So what happened when you got to New York?
I was trying to get involved in freelance writing and journalism through my sort of literary connections, and also with my background, I was also interviewing for jobs with like Simon and Schuster, and I wasn't sure what to do, but I felt like I needed to start getting a bit more serious. And then I obviously needed some cash to live, and I had worked in restaurants in France, and I was comfortable working in restaurants. I think it wasn't a huge reach, and so in New York, it was really more about food and socializing and getting money in quickly. So always knew you could have tips, right?
Yes,
and it was great. So you could bring money in on the first week you start working. You can and that network led to my first apartment. So I was working in there at Home Restaurant, which was a cute little Cornelia Street across from the original Poe, which was Mario Batali's first restaurant.
Okay.
And it was doing like kind of, using all the cool local butchers like FICO's Pork Shop, and there was the steak was coming from a great little steak shop that's closed, a butcher. Anyways, there's all this kind of cool stuff, and they were really raising the bar as far as what they expected their waiters to know. And this was like Danny Meyer era, of hospitality, where your servers need to be now kind of like knowledgeable about food. And so I knew a lot about food, and that was also cool. So they had like a little quiz that you had to fill out. It was like name 6 mushrooms, or what's the difference between a single malt and a blended whiskey. And I did really well on the test, and they're like, "Oh, great!" So I was like, "I'm like, this is a tough city. Like, that's my first job in a little sort of bistro." And then I left New York. I kind of had like that first year New York blues, where I was like, "Man, I'm gonna go see the old girlfriend back in Portland," and then went back to Portland. I was like, "This is no way, man. I made a huge mistake. Can you never go home again?" Right? And so I'm like, come back to New York. I'm training now. I'm like getting fit. I'm like, I'm going to take this city on. And then applied for a job at Union Square Cafe. And that was the #1 city in the #1 Zagat popular restaurant.
Yeah, at the time, yeah.
And I thought, well, this will be, might as well, I'm good at this. Let's just see, I'll work at the best place possible. And got a gig there after like 5 trails. And, they really, again, put you through a lot of extra work. I mean, that first week of trailing, you're not, you work almost literally 5 shifts, and then you work with a group of elders that will talk about, behind your back, they talk about whether or not you're fit.
Yep.
Are you that 51%, or are you that 49%? And, I really worked hard for that job, and I got it. And then I got really turned on by the wine program there and realized this is really fun part of restaurant work. The intellectual part for me was the wine program, not being involved in the kitchen. And Karen King, who was the wine director there, was really generous and did a really good job training the staff. And again, this was kind of the upper echelon of servers where there was a lot of expectation, and mostly just because the level of clientele there was very demanding and very sophisticated. But they also needed the servers to be really nice, and they really prided themselves on getting good people. And Karen King was really, she wasn't like an on-the-floor somm either. She was doing the wine buying and stuff, but she let the waiters be basically the sort of their own somms.
Yep.
And the list was maybe a couple hundred selections. And so it was a good opportunity to learn the list. And then I started thinking, well, this could be really interesting to maybe this career of buying wine and writing wine lists. I like that almost more than writing stories. It's a neat idea of using your own interests to create a list. And it was something that I remember very, one moment just saying, I'm going to go for this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to focus. I can just sit in the city for the next 10 years just floundering. And Karen was nice enough to get me an introduction to Joseph Nace, who was the wine director at L'Espinasse, which is, 4-star Louis XIV dining room, tuxedos, St. Regis, which is where I met Oscar.
I was going to say, and then Oscar was there then, right?
Yeah, so Oscar Henket.
Shout out to Oscar Henket.
Yeah, so he was wandering through the corridors of the St. Regis, and I was working in the wine cellar. And our paths didn't cross all the time, but he's a fairly distinguished-looking guy. Yeah. And then so that was my first sort of, boom. I was in a really, established but fairly cold hotel, with a deep underground labyrinth, and working in a cellar that, was fluorescent lights and totally different vibe than being in the congenial Union Square hospitality family. And it was a huge adjustment. But I kind of looked at it as a stage, an apprenticeship where I'm going to make less money, but I'm also working at the St. Regis, and the dining room up there is, one of the most exciting wine programs in the world. And Joseph was going for the Grand Award for Wine Spectators, so there was a green light to purchase. Buy. Yeah, and that was fun as a young wine guy, because I really didn't know that much. And you learn very quickly how much you don't know about wine when you get into a program. And it's so humbling. And then you're like, okay, I need to, all these labels look alike. What's that all about, And you just go crazy. And well, there's another year. What happened to that? So it's all that classifying and organizing. And then, then I wasn't even on the floor then. I was just doing like room service restocks and running the behind the scenes stuff for the first 9 months. And then eventually like, what do you think about coming up on the floor? And I was like, yeah, hell yeah, let's do it. And got fitted for a tux. And I remember just being so nervous on that floor. Like I'm in a new world, like bumping into like, the queen, like, oh, I'm sorry, and they're like, oh, that guy. Who's that guy on the floor? He just bumped into the queen. And you're like, oh, that was a queen? Jeez.
The queen of what?
Yeah. That was Elton John I just knocked down the stairs.
It's so funny because you obviously you mentioned Oscar. We just dropped his episode on a week ago, which means nothing to you because this won't drop for 3 weeks. But like his stories, like it's like there's levels of things, and there's whole other worlds that we don't even like. And when I heard about Oscar, I was like, wait, you're Elton John's private butler? I didn't know that like existed.
Yeah.
Like, maitre d' etage. What the is that?
Yeah.
And like you said, it's a place where the Queen of England is.
Yeah. Elizabeth
Taylor
Taylor had her own. Yeah. So it was a different world. I mean, I remember going up to Michael Jordan's room with a bottle of wine and being like, me? It's like a 1941 Cheval Blanc half bottle. And he's like, totally loved being in his room because he's obviously, constantly being bombarded.
Yep.
And it was that kind of, I'm like, here we go. This will be interesting. So there was exposure to lots of celebrities on the floor there, and that was 2000. So Y2K.
Yep.
But mad buying, really big time, and it was really quite easy to sell wine there because you just had to know your way around your wine list. And then people would be like, do we do the Range Rover or the 61 Margaux? And you're like, Margaux, do the Margaux. I'm like, oh, okay. We already have the 10 Range Rover. And so,
wait, just for you guys, he did say Range Rover. He is talking about the automobile. Should we buy another automobile or a bottle of wine? That's what he said, yes.
yeah. And I'm not being paid by Range Rover.
And neither am I, but you might want to consider. I do think this is a luxury podcast, so...
Well, let's see what happens.
If any of you interns out there into wine working for Range Rover, say, hey, there's a black wine guy and some guy from Australia. And we can go down there and film something at Brash Higgins. I mean, yeah, the ideas are going now. Thanks so much, Brad.
That year or so in that restaurant, because it was very strange, because the waiters were like hired guns. They were really good.
Like
they
the
were,
best, right?
But they were really sneaky because it was a union, and it was and half of them were Romanian, and the Romanians were like very sarcastic, but they were really good, and you never knew they were sarcastic. Like
that's how sarcastic they were.
Yeah, they'd be like, yeah, they were really good at like, oh yes sir, of course, sir, and the restaurant had just resurfaced after it was closed for a while after there was a sexual harassment suit between a coat check girl and one of the maitre d's, and that showed the power of the union in that hotel. Greg Coons was the chef who was a magic, huge inspiration, Swiss chef, and he had to leave. And then Christian Delouvrier came in, and that's who I worked with for the next chapter. And very classic French chef. But I learned a heck of a lot. All the walk-ins would have woven baskets with green beans, and it was very different than any walk-ins I've ever seen. And I learned very much what 4-star service meant. Some of the waiters and some of the maitre d's and all those guys were all super incredibly high class and really, really gorgeous with people. And you learned how to anticipate people's needs. And it was a great experience. And all the ways to get out of making a table feel uncomfortable. And that's where those Romanian waiters and the other waiters on the team were so good that they could predict a problem at a table and then diffuse it. Or they would never be stumped. They knew how to get out of a table if they were stuck, and they'd be like, excuse me, there's a fire. They knew all the ways to step away from a table so nobody felt embarrassed. And that was something that was a huge help later as I took over programs, and then you become the face of a program. You have to find ways of excusing yourself from situations, and maybe you don't know the answer. And back then, which was only 20 years ago, nobody had Google at their fingertips.
Right.
So if you lied, they're going to bust you. Like now they're like, oh, yeah, I don't think so.
Right.
Tell me those 7 Grand Crus of, and you're like, there's Murphy. They're like, Murphy? I've never heard of that one.
Yeah.
So, Joseph Nace, who was the wine director there, said, here's how you actually make this work. You know your wine list better than anybody else.
Yeah.
You know your chef's cooking and your chef almost better than your partner, and you have a good reference book nearby.
There it is.
And, if you know your list, very few people are going to bother you with questions of, Tokai law, like what's the Azu, Petunios. They just want to know what's drinking well tonight and what's going to be in their comfort zone. So you read very quickly what someone's after, what they're going to do, what their price range is, maybe where they're comfortable being, and then you work fast because they're really not that interested in you. They're there with their guests. And so all that stuff was a really good experience. And then that led to Danielle, which was also kind of in that same rarefied air, and working with Jean-Luc Ledoux, absolute legend, at Danielle, and being, sort of primed to replace the Somm who had worked at Café Bleu, which was up near the Whitney back then, where the Whitney was on the Upper East Side. Right. And then that was another world of being in that very French, very sort of, where did you study wine? And I'd be like, I've just kind of learned on the go. I'm a quick study. And they were like, no, you should have gone to the School of Gastronomy at Lyon. And you're like, So that was always weird, And and it followed me even further when I got into winemaking, because I learned a lot of it on my own and just through instinct.
Sure.
And a lot of people, they judge you very quickly if you haven't gone through a university system. So it's an interesting way to, especially in that kind of environment too, where most of the kids that were working there had gone to, had been involved in some sort of training back in France.
Yeah.
So.
Or the Netherlands, like Oscar.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Let's take a quick break because I want to unpack it a little bit more, and then we'll get into Australia. So we'll be right back, everybody. Okay, we are back. So you were talking about the fact that most of your wine education it's self kind of, it's not formal, let's put it that way. Like you've had great mentors and you've worked with great people. And I remember when I started in the business in like 97 with Acker, which is high-end retail. And I thought about getting an MS, and they're like, you don't, like back then you didn't need, like it wasn't such a thing. The people who had it were from Europe, basically. Like there was only there was like a handful of master somms in New York City. They were all from Europe. They were all from France or somewhere. And, but there were people running programs like yourself who just knew wine and loved wine. I think that's shifted now, but yeah, talk about that. So you said some people would look down on you a little bit when you a little bit, or there was a raising of the nose a little bit.
Yeah, wine has always been such a complicated social class. It's an elitist beverage in a lot of environments.
And it is. Thanks for saying that. I mean, I know people want it, but that's kind of just the nature of what it's been.
I mean, and in those environments too, it was very much cachet and prestige, and people had lots of money.
Well, yeah, they're Range Rover or a bottle of wine.
Yeah. Range Rover? Oh, yeah. .com. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
I think it ties back into some of that sort of, having the balls to go and do things like find jobs that I wasn't necessarily like in Europe, like standing on that corner and going, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm gonna get out of this with enough cash to keep traveling. Mm-hmm. And in the restaurant business, it was the same thing with Union Square. I'm just going to work at the best place I can work with the best people.
I love that philosophy.
Well, then you do work with people that are really cool. Yeah. They're hardworking, and a lot of them are really...
They're really smart.
Many of the Union Square people were artists or opera singers.
Yep.
Or
well-educated, like Juilliard, Ivy League type,
Yeah.
You're like, this is big-time hospitality, yeah.
Yeah, and you felt good about making people happy. That was the part of the enlightened hospitality. And waiters were given respect, and they were given, the sort of way to kind of, you could solve situations without having to run to a manager. But that was always kind of like my feeling was work with the best. And then the next step, you should always work with a good wine program, even if you're polishing glasses, because really it comes down to just showing up.
Yep.
And
osmosis. You're going to hear stuff. You're there. You're in the room.
You're there, and when someone quits or something happens, you're going to continue. And if you know the person who's in charge, they see that you're passionate, and then they start. Yeah, exactly. They start teaching you, and they start teaching. They're like, okay, well, maybe you can help work this shift, or maybe help with inventory, and then go to a tasting. I can't make it, and then that person starts to really evolve, and that's what I did. And I got involved at the St. Regis, which was way out of my league. And I remember, like I said, being terrified on that dining room floor, bumping into people, just like, we needed a place where Brad could stand, like just not get in anybody's way.
Yeah, gotcha.
Just plug into the wall for a while and charge. Yeah, you stand over there. And and that really served me well. I think that idea of being scared going into something and that sort of facing that fear, and then you realize, okay, it's really not that big a deal. It's just my own head that's doing it. But there would be times on the floor, the guests would be looking for the master sommelier pin, and saying, "Aren't you a master sommelier? Then why should I listen to you?" Yeah. And that was interesting, because that was somebody who really wanted to pick a fight, and then you'd have to diffuse that, because that no one's going to win that battle. Right. Then you'd be like, "Excuse me," and then I would never go back to that table. It would get passed on to somebody else. But yeah, there was that sort of feeling amongst the industry as well. Like Jean-Luc Ledoux was like the first rock star sommelier to me. Like Roger de Gorn was was a Chanterelle, and Jean-Luc had taken over Danielle, and Jean-Luc loved to party, and he loved rock and roll and the Clash, and he was fun, you know, and he was young, and he was like rah, and he was so cool. And I remember just being like that whole paradigm shift with him here in New York, and that was really amazing to work with him, under him for a while, and learn how he thought about wine, and got in, you know, his sort of mentorship, different than Joe Nace's at L'Espinasse, but still really helped kind of teach me how to focus on wine program and how to sell wine and how to have fun, you know, but doing it all without a master sommelier accreditation, because I was like, I'm in it. I'm already where I want to be.
Exactly.
I got the job. I actually started working for David Boulay, which is another Oscar crossover. We worked together at the Boulay when it reopened after 9/11, and very quickly got involved as the wine buyer there. The first David Boulay's universe is exciting, and it's incredibly manic at times. And when that restaurant first opened, hadn't been finished completely, and it was the old Boulay Bakery, which I think is now a Citibank, down on West Broadway. But you had to be really patient to kind of work there. But I loved getting into that program, and Boulay's cooking was absolutely amazing, and the tasting menu and his level of clientele was really exciting, because there's a lot of foodies that from around the world as a destination restaurant. And then it became a whole nother scene of just running that program, you know. But all of those people before taught me how to handle pressure. They taught me how to diffuse situations, you know, and just learn slowly how to build a wine list that was profitable. Don't get too carried away. And I think that was the first kind of buying position I had at Cafe Bleu. I was like, well, I'm just going to do a L'Espinasse list here. And that didn't fly. I remember this story, which is always kind of funny to me, was like, you know, Marcel was the accountant at the Dynex group, which is Danielle's group. And the words of wisdom were, everything's fine until you get a phone call from Marcel, then you're in trouble. And I didn't hear from Marcel forever. And then I get a call from Marcel, and he's like, why are you buying so much wine? He's like, now I know why I can't afford curtain rods for the new DBGB downtown. And then that was pretty much the writing on the wall for me. I was like, well, goodbye, Danielle. Goodbye, Dynex. I bid you farewell. And, you know, I was sent on my way. And I was like, okay, there's a good experience there. You know, this is a business. This is about making money.
And that's the flip side of it.
This company.
Right now, everybody sees the sexy side, and thank you, Som TV, for bringing forth all these great stories. But like at the end of the day, it's also a business too.
Yeah, you were there as an investor.
Yeah,
and that was a really good lesson to learn as well. So it's all been, even when you fail, you're like, oh, I was depressed after that, because nobody likes losing their job. And then you're like, okay, the phoenix will rise again.
Right.
And you learn. And you maybe buy only 6 bottles of this rather than a dozen, or you just keep the list really loose and fluid. And that's what I did at Boulay, and it worked. And he really respected me, and that really helped, because David could be if he didn't like you, you were out. If he liked you, then he was hilarious. He's a really funny guy. He's very generous. You know, Boulay would mumble jokes, and he'd be this. You know, if he liked you, life was a lot better.
Of course.
And we made a lot of money. We were doing wine pairings, which were new to sort of New York, you know, and his menus were kind of evolving, and you could start throwing down Zibibbo or sake.
Speaking of which, you brought some. We got some wines. We haven't even tasted his wines yet, but you brought some very delicious wines to taste. This is an interesting Grenache you brought. It's very pale. Usually Amador is so hot, but I also looked. It was 13.9. It's beautiful. I get a lot of strawberry, raspberry. It's bright, lifted.
It does. It has this kind of strange. Something about it feels like an orchard that's slightly kind of decaying.
Yep.
It has this kind of interesting, like, decaying zone to it, which, you know, like when you have a bowl of oranges and one of them is slightly...
Yep, I know. Yeah.
That has that sort of vibe to it. Yeah, so that was a really interesting time to be a wine director there. And then that led to lots of traveling, and then that led to eventually going to Australia.
Yeah, let's talk about 2004.
Yeah.
Which I think is so interesting, given what you are now doing at Brash Higgins, you and Nicole, and what you're championing, that it was a trip sponsored by the Grateful Palate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for people who haven't been around, the Grateful Palate was they were actually out of Oxnard. Yeah, they were out of Oxnard, California, and the
warehouse was in Oxnard.
The warehouse in Oxnard. Yeah. And they always, because I was living out there, then they would always come up to Santa Barbara, one of the reps. But but like one of the reasons a lot of people hate Robert Parker is because of the wines that Grateful Palate was in, but like big, bombastic, 500% new oak.
Yeah.
Nothing less than 15% alcohol.
Yeah.
Fruit bombs from Southern Australia.
Yeah.
So I just think it's interesting. We'll get into it. So how did you end up on the trip in 2004 with the Grateful Palate?
We always had to fight really hard to get time off the floor because you were the guy, right? You were the ace that was making these great wine sales, and we, Boulay was always kind of tightly staffed, so it was just me, and I was doing like 90 seats in a 4-star New York City dining room, and people be ordering expensive Bordeaux's or they'd be doing wine pairings, and you had to be all over the place. So to get off the floor was very hard. We made friends at Danube, which is a restaurant that I also got to be the wine director for, which was David's Austrian sibling next door to Boulay, which is no longer there. But there's a somm there named Marin Nadalin, who I just saw last night, who was someone that I had cultivated and made into a somm there. And so I had him and a bartender who would become a junior somm at Boulay after this, get on the floor and cover me. And so I had to get almost a full month off and made an ultimatum to the general manager at the time and said, listen, I'm going to do this. I've worked really hard here, and I'm sorry it's a long time, but either I do this or I walk. And they're like, okay. Major calamity. Anyways, I got what I wanted, and I got to go on this trip. And they invited me to come because the Grateful Palate was trying to spread the word about Australian wine.
Yeah.
And Jean-Luc was on this trip as well, which to me was going to be kind of fun. And so we arranged that we could get a free flight over, which is also part of the negotiations with the Grateful Palate, saying we had all these list of demands, total New York City pricks, And another thing, no blow-up mattresses.
Yeah.
I want a nice duvet. And then we got, I got on this trip, and then I was just really excited because it's so far away, and Australia was just, everybody has their own preconceived notions about it. But
insert, Crocodile Dundee joke here. Insert minute work reference here.
Yeah, which is hardly, it's like saying Chicago's about Al Capone and deep dish pizza.
It's about your sorry-ass baseball teams. Yeah. Just kidding.
It's about architecture. What are you talking about?
Exactly. It is about architecture. And Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
I think, so I really didn't know what to expect, but I was really gunning to get on this trip. And then it was really eye-opening. And we spent most of the trip in South Australia, around Adelaide, and visited a lot of different producers that were in the Grateful Palate book. And I had just sort of felt some sort of connection and was like really, really attentive and like really into it, and was like the guy in the bus that would collect cool bottles from every producer so we could have a blowout lunch at the end of the trip, and took a lot of interest in it. And it's almost like subconsciously I knew that I wanted to somehow come back, and got back to New York and was sad, depressed for weeks, because I'd been like Avatar. I'd been in the secret world where there was space, there was room. You could swing a cat. That was the Australian expression for open space. And for the next few years, kind of worked my way through Boulay, and then eventually I quit and wasn't sure what to do next, but I needed a break and didn't want to go back into hospitality in the restaurant in a lateral move, because I thought, if you can work for David Boulay for 4 years, you've done really well.
Right.
And I was proud of myself, but realized maybe it's time for something new. And I didn't even know what that was. But the Grateful Palate had Dan Phillips, who was the owner, had become a regular at Boulay, and Chris Ringland, who was one of his winemakers, who was the winemaker for a new company that Dan had started called Our Wines, which was then saying, well, we'll just make our own wines. And we don't need the Shervingtons and the Nunes and the Torbrecks.
Yep.
We can start to produce their own. And so they rented a big winery down in South Australia and said, Brad, why don't you come over for 3 months and we'll put you to work. And you can just be like the cellar dude or the Guy Friday. And I was like, perfect. And obviously the undercurrent of that was that they will brainwash me, and then I'll go back to New York and sell Australian wine and be part of their, because they were looking for people with credentials.
I'm thinking, okay, this guy is an idiot. He's like at the top of the New York hospitality game. You could have, you're in a place where you were probably making some decent money, and had you stayed in that business, no telling what you would be doing in New York now. But I love your spirit where it just wasn't you. And you wanted you said, fellas, it's time to do something different.
Yeah, I mean, and then of course there was a girl involved.
Oh, well, come on. Thank you. I'm glad. It's always, wine is always about a boy or girl. It is always.
It does seem to be like the bad breakups are the ones that you go off and say, I'm going to become a, neurosurgeon.
Yeah.
Or I'm just going to, and then you move to a new town and you get a new job and your life takes an interesting turn to the left.
Right.
And that was really true. I had at the time a fiance who was in Spain, in Barcelona, and I was going to move there, and that fell apart. And I was like, I'm going to go as far away from Spain as possible.
Right.
So there you go. You got to the crux of that. So really, there was a woman involved in that, and I just had to get out of New York, and that was really what I needed. And Australia gave me that space. He asked me to come and work for three months, so it meant at least I had a shelter, some connections.
You know how to do it, man. You're like, I think I'm past my air mattress days, blow up mattress days. At least blow up mattress in my pocket days.
I'd like to have a swimming pool one day where I can just have an array of blow up things, like rafts. And that was, and so going to Australia at that stage was scary because I was 39. I was in LAX on the way to Sydney, and I was like, oh, what the F am I doing? I should have this figured out by now. And I just seemed like, okay, well, you're right. I mean, if I would have stayed in New York, I could have played it safe. I could have gotten a job with a Russian tea house or, somewhere else, or gone to Per Se, or which I felt would just be kind of like just doing something all over again.
More of the same.
And then once I had the revelation that I didn't want to be a restaurateur, that I didn't want to do it for my own business, then I realized, well, then why am I putting up with a lot of grief? And a lot of long hours and a lot of all the stuff that's the non-romantic side of the business, which is, the pressure and all the sort of other things that people don't talk about. And so I was happy to go to Australia, but I really didn't know what was going to happen next. And I remember being slightly scared, like, oh, here we go. Like, this is, oof. But I knew that my life would change. And subletted my apartment in New York, gave myself a little bit of leeway to sort of explore it and know that if it all went wrong, I could come back. And that gave me a little bit of a safety net. And fortunately, I, kind of had an open mind, and I met some key people there that wanted me to stay. And one of them was my future partner, Nicole, who I met just, at the local pub. I was pruning after the vintage had ended. I went to Vietnam for a month, and then got on my own, just went up into like the northern part up near China and met a lot of, crazy farmers.
Kind of like Martin Sheen and Apocalypse Now.
Yeah.
But anyway, up the Mekong River.
Yeah. It's just, just way out of my league again. I was on a motorcycle with a Vietnamese guide, and I had a little bit of money left, and I was like, this looks really cool. I'm going to get on one of these Russian Minsk motorcycles, which has really good climbing capacity. They're stinky and they're indestructible, essentially. And this guy named Hung, he and I, and he was super cool, and he took me up into like the flower mung tribes and along the border of China. I know you don't want to let this go.
Was his last name Leica?
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
Yep. Oh God, he was so fun. Anyways, we got into a lot of different, but I, be meeting a lot of farmers that were my age and had like hands like burnished, leather, and it's tons of vertical farming. They're farming on like sheer cliffs, and I was like, man, I should probably toughen up a little bit. Maybe going back to Australia, I'll prune and I'll spend the whole year and I'll just give it more time. I'm not going to go back to New York. I don't know what I want to do there yet. So, that guy Hung, who took me around. I remember I had no money left to actually give him a tip, and I was like, thanks so much, but I'm a little bit broke right now. I've got some money back in the States, it's offshore. And because, after 2 weeks with the guy, he's expecting a little bit of a pat on the back.
He's like a little, hey, Llama, how about a little some extra for the effort,
Yeah, like, come on, $100 to him, he could have changed his life.
Yeah.
And I got back to Australia, and we stayed in touch, and I eventually sent him $100 back in an envelope, like in cash. Like wrap some paper around it. So
I know. I used to do that.
super, and he got this cash, and he bought a suit, and he got a job in the government, and his whole life changed. $100. And he was like, I can't believe you sent this. And I was like, well, you took me on this amazing ride, and it's the least I can do. $100, you know, it's 2 cases of beer here for you. He's like, I bought a whole new suit and
changed his life.
It did.
That's freaking awesome, man.
But that's how, I mean, that's what happens when you leave your house, right? Everything can change so quickly. And I came back to Australia with a different mentality and a different thought. Like, well, I will prune. Why don't I prune and just hang out? And, you know, I can do this. And ended up meeting Nicole just randomly after, you know, Friday night knockoffs type of deal. And she liked me enough to invite me to stay. And she had a vineyard and she was a grape grower. And it wasn't too long until I discovered that. I'm like, are those your vines? No. And then eventually, like, oh, okay, yeah, they're yours. And that was really fun too, because then we got involved in viticulture and then like making decisions and then having a really kind of quick access point to becoming, you know, a winemaker.
Well, talk about Nicole's vineyard, because she planted it herself, right?
She planted it, in 1997 with her husband at that time, who passed away in 2005. They planted it 17 acres to Sheeraz and Cabernet, which were the main, and still are the 2 main red wine grapes, you know, Big Red back in the 90s. And it was a gorgeous vineyard, still is. They had a water drilling business, which meant they had geologists and they knew where the kind of sort of good sort of combinations of soil types. And this was a meter of red clay over a big sheet of limestone up on a ridge, and so it had great drainage, good exposure, nice spot particularly for reds if you want to make some muscular red wines. And voila, the vineyard was planted. And then when I met her, since when her husband passed away, she had to take over the water drilling business and raise 2 kids and then deal with a lot of moving pieces, and had her own wine label at the time, trying to make a little bit of Sheeraz and Cabernet. And so I got busy sort of selling that wine, which has started piling up, and started learning the kind of discount sort of channels in Australia, which was actually helpful as well. You know, to go from like the fine wine world down to like, how do we move shit, you know, was a really kind of good experience, because, you know, this was no longer, you know, $800 bottles of wine. This is now, how do we, you know, rob Peter
we
to
got
pay
to move
Paul.
this case. Exactly. Yeah.
And then, but once that happened, then her label, because of the internet, you know, you couldn't really recover once you try to start discounting your wines. And the vineyard was really nice, and I had more time then to focus on sort of changing the farming to organic farming.
By the way, I'm just going to kill this because looks like you guys went in on this Zibibbo. I'm going to ask you about it.
Yeah. So so you're pouring the Zibibbo.
Yep.
Yeah, it looks good. The end of that bottle is always kind of the more nutrient rich.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, the crunchy stuff is free.
You're gonna feel that it's like drinking echinacea. You know, you're like,
oh, okay. Well, I did live in California for 10 years. I used to do all that echinacea.
You can feel your hair growing faster.
Exactly.
And your vision gets better. Yeah. So that vineyard, Omensetter Vineyard, which Nicole planted, became a beautiful place for me to learn about viticulture. And then we had some issues where it was so hot that
how hot was it?
God, it was.
Sorry.
Yeah, that the flashers were handing out pictures of themselves. It was so hot. There you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
He's a quick study.
Yeah. And so we had to start thinking about possibly removing Sheeraz, which was to me something that made perfect sense, but it was a radical.
But it's kind of like sacrilege in Australia.
Well, it's in a Shiraz district. You'd rather remove the Chardonnay.
Yeah.
You know, and then. But
what the hell are they doing over there? It's the American. They don't have any Sheeraz.
I like it. The Upper East Side lady who lunches. Yeah. What are you doing? Maury.
What's going over there?
Those hippies. So we had which was fine. You know, we got a lot of attention for removing Shiraz and trialing Nero d'Avola, which was obviously from Sicily. And as a wine geek, for me, it blew my mind. I'm like, oh my God, you mean we can take Shiraz out? And if it's genetically appropriate, we can put a new variety or any grape variety you can top grow onto, you can graft like a fruit tree, which is something I knew a little bit about.
Because he studied botany in college as well, people.
Yeah. I worked at a nursery that sold apple. You could get 4 different apple varieties on one rootstock. You could have Red Delicious, Yellow, Granny Smith, and Cox's Orange Pippin or whatever, all on one trunk.
Damn.
which is cool for a small garden. If
Yes.
you have one tree, you can
I did not even know that was possible.
Well, it totally is, but I didn't think it was possible in grape growing. But so rather than have to tear out a whole vineyard and excavate the root system out and start over, you can use that existing root system and put a whole new variety on top of it. The genetic information stays separate. So Nero was grafted onto Sheeraz to an existing, really healthy 12-year-old root system, and then you're just grafting on little buds that are like the size of pencil erasers. And then that energy comes roaring up in spring, and you get a huge amount of growth. And then you spend the next 2 years just kind of shaping the vine so it's in place, and you've got, good structure for the next, 40 years. And then by the second year, you're actually starting getting fruit.
So I got to ask a question, because this goes back to how this is like just from working 3 months in a vineyard. Like, how did you, obviously it was obviously on the job training, but like, damn, man, like, this is like some, like, you didn't go to Davis, you didn't go to Cal Poly.
But I'd worked in Portland Nursery, and I knew about grafting.
Portland wins again.
I swear. So all this disparate information that I thought I'd just be the most interesting guy in prison, all of a sudden.
You could have said the bar. I would never. The most interesting guy in prison is getting his ass kicked or something else.
I don't know why I said prison.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, where he's so positive. How do you go there? But no, I hear you. But it all came together at this point. Yeah.
That was so that was a game changer for our vineyard, and also to launch a new wine business. So we had the old wine business, which we needed to reinvent because of the discounting. It was a good vineyard, really nice vineyard, and it was showing a lot of personality, and we're like, how do we do this? We need to start over. And we had Nero d'Avola.
And was that your idea? How did Nero d'Avola come into the picture?
It was at that time a lot of, and still to this day, there are commercial nurseries that import grape varieties, and then they spend 3 years usually in biosecurity and quarantine to make sure you're not going to fuck the whole thing up.
Right.
And the Chalmers family was kind of were very renowned for bringing in particularly Italian varieties, because they saw obviously there'd be some applications in South Australia as things got warmer, and everything gets ripe in South Australia. It's like Sicily. So the idea is to find the things that are well suited to heat, that don't need a lot of water. Nero d'Avola ticked all those boxes. The trick is getting proper clones that aren't virus ridden, and so you're looking for healthy new clonal material so it stays healthy. And there was a new clone that had cleared quarantine in like 2008 called Maturo 1. Anyways, this whole thing was blowing my mind. We were looking at Cinsault, Carignan, and Nero d'Avola as 3 possible varieties to introduce, because they're tough and they can make really delicious wines, very compelling drinking. We went with Nero partially because I'd been drinking Nero from Coast Winery in Sicily, and I loved the story and the applications of how similar McLaren Vale was to Sicily. And so, boom, we chose that and trialed it and went to Sicily, said hello, learned more about amphoras than we did about Nero, but realized that certainly the climates were almost identical: hot, dry, ancient soils, very, very arid. So we figured Nero would be a really good choice. The story made sense. And then found a local potter back in Adelaide who could make clay pots in these amphoras, because I'm like, that would be really cool. Like, I don't know how it's going to work.
And what year is this?
That's 2011.
Okay. So speaking of amphora, it's big now.
Yeah.
Were you kind of on the early adopter side of that, would you say?
I would say so.
Okay.
Yeah. You never know what's going on in the backyard of certain Italian families.
Right.
People could make wine in any vessel, that doesn't leak. I think, we were definitely the earlier sort of finding a local potter who had never done anything like it. He'd done maybe 100-liter tandoori ovens. And all roads led to this guy, John Bennett, because I was interested. And I was asking my buddies that were like amateur potters, like, hey, you made me that wobbly ashtray. What do you think about making a 200-liter amphora vessel that I can put some wine in safely and for 20 years? And they're like, maybe not.
Speaking of wobbly ashtrays, remember like how ingrained smoking was in American culture, that like when you were a kid you'd make an ashtray and bring it over to your parents even if they didn't smoke? That's like, there was 2 things: it was an ashtray or a really bad looking dinosaur.
They put coins in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Or breath mints. But
So-
that was the story.
That's
That was the
crazy,
story.
man.
There
Yeah.
was nobody doing that because Australia had been making a lot of headways as a very reliable and very sane winemaking nation. And this is where you have to be cautious because it has a wonderful reputation for making really reliably consistent wines. And we'd seen that with massive producers that have infiltrated the U.S. market for many years. And so for someone to say, let's take a step back in time and do something anti-industrial, like the Jesus Christ era,
Right.
Roman emperors, clay pots, was an interesting trial. And it got us a lot of attention. And it was really, again, a lot of people thought we were crazy hippies. And then I was just like, well, I would much rather fail miserably with this experiment than just release a mediocre Sheeraz. And that was the real attitude I had. I remember sometimes just somebody will say something and it really hits you even though you've heard it a million times. I remember a Trent Reznor interview, 9 Inch Nails band, and he was saying, if you're going to start a new band, for God's sake, try to be original. Don't just go be in a cover band. I mean, you can if you want to make a living.
Right.
But it resonated, and I was like, yeah, you're right. This makes sense. Let's try to do something different. Otherwise, yeah, it's good for a business to create a new sort of splash and make some noise, but it also helps push the dialogue, right? It pushes the envelope a bit, and that's almost as important as to contribute something to the wine region, and that was really exciting as well to be like, wow, we have the potential to introduce a new grape variety using a really, really old, very soulful
What's
style.
old is new, using this old ancient vessel.
Yeah.
With their new techniques.
Without any guidance or instruction book.
Yeah, you're crazy like that. I love that, man.
No, I mean, anybody in university or all the trained winemakers I knew were like, no idea. It's going to be vinegar. The wine, if you leave it for 6 months in a clay vessel, what do you expect is going to happen? It's going to turn into something.
They were very wrong. So I'm drinking one of your wines right now. That is in M4, correct?
Yep, the Zibibbo.
Okay. Tell people about Zibibbo.
So Zibibbo is Muscat of Alexandria. Zibibbo is the name they use for it in Sicily.
Ah.
So it's
very aromatic.
Yeah, so Muscat.
And I totally got the elderflower, and I was like, it reminded me of Saint Germain, and I was like, oh, that's elderflower, but obviously citrus and apricot-y. And I have this is unfine and unfiltered for you guys, for the camera. You see, it's quite, we would call it dank.
Yeah, no, I think diaphanous is the word you're after, but anyways.
I never heard that word.
Yeah.
It's dank where I'm from.
Oh, okay.
But now it's actually, guys, diaphanous. See how quick I
There it is.
So what does that mean?
It's cloudy. It's a little bit sort of, it's
Ooh.
slightly translucent. It's not clear. It's chiffon.
Mr. English
There you
major.
Well, it's...
You should go on Jeopardy.
In the same way that like a Hefeweizen is a little bit cloudy, right?
Yes.
So let's go cloudy. The thing I think with this wine is that it's so primitive the way it's made. It's essentially taking Muscat, which is very sweet and very, very fruity, and then aging it and letting it ferment so there's no sugar in it. And
Well, let me tell you about this,
the
though,
wine's dry.
because there was only a little bit left. It's room temperature, not even cellar temperature. But it's so complex, so flavorful, still good, still crushable. The tartness in it. What would you like? Is there a pairing that you have, like because you're a food and wine guy? What would you pair that with?
The reason this wine exists to this day is because it has a magical aptitude with really, really powerful flavors that cripple other white wines. So one of the dishes we saw very quickly, and it was paired with a Somme in Melbourne at Lake House Restaurant back in probably 2015 when we first started making this wine, was with a Morton bay bug annulati. Bay bugs are like kind of like langoustines.
Okay.
And it had homemade kimchi and kimchi butter. And
So there you got what's that? It's called gochujang. You got very powerful flavors with kimchi.
Yeah.
Very, very.
fermenting.
Yes, fermented, stinky.
Vinegary.
Yep.
And this wine with that dish was an amazing alchemy, and it ran for like 6 months, the longevity of that tasting menu. And so very quickly it had a place at the table. And we saw not only was it a fun and interesting wine to drink, it had a lot of sort of applications that almost taste a bit like sour beer. It can taste a little bit,
Yeah, I get that. I see that.
you know, refreshing like Snapple tea. Had a lot of lemon verbena.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like in China, I'm sure they put some ice in there and it'd be like lemonade. I mean, it is very refreshing.
Yeah, and that was part of the thrill, was to see how it stood up with flavors like Szechuan and Indian like chutneys, and then really simple flavors like Jamaican jerk chicken.
Dude, these are like, I'm just envisioning all of them. I'm like, yep, bang, yep. It would go to yep. I'm like, yo, I need some Korean barbecue. I need this. I need to go to Jerk Hut, Philly. Boom, this, boom. Yeah.
Spending a week in New York was great with this wine because you're showing it to a lot of different, interesting, really talented
Absolutely.
somms. And they're like, yeah, we've got this scallop dish with, you know, corn and habanero. And like, oh, that could work. Or like a charred octopus or something slightly burnt or, you know, blackened.
Yep.
And Mexican street corn. I mean, the anchovies, anything with vinegar. And so this was a gap that a lot of white wine, you know,
just can't fill.
Couldn't handle.
Yeah.
So that's why the wine and the storyline behind it was interesting as well. We wanted to make a wine that had a compelling story to your average drinker who might be, you know, a doctor or a bus driver or a dancer, and you can take them on a journey and say, here's a wine from the center of Australia. It's very hot, made by, you know, this person. And then, you know, made in a clay pot, left alone for 5 months. You know, it's really primitive. There's a layer of yeast that grows on the top of it, you know, that layer of flor, which protects the wine from spoiling. And, you know, turns out to be kind of a really interesting drink. And it's a grape in Australia that might be, you know, more destined for fresh eating or sultanas or box wines even, you know, or cheaper sparkling muscats. So we were looking for a white wine that we could turn into something, you know, that orange wine category, long skin contact, that would be just, you know, really different. And it sort of suit the bill. The first year we made it was in our carport. We didn't have a winery at the time. We were transitioning because it turned out like
a true garagiste.
It was definitely. There was a lot of winemakers were uneasy with the floor growing on top of these vessels. It was seen to be possibly could spread.
Oh, wow.
And so we were sort of politely asked if we could make the amphora wines, maybe somewhere a little bit more neutral. And then, you know, but that was 2013 was that first year. And then we realized we probably need our own winery and reconverted an existing shed into a winery. So Brash Higgins has its own workspace now, which is really awesome to have our own zone where we can just take time and tinker around and make wines like that, you know, you don't always want to have people behind you pushing you because we're not sure how the wines are going to resolve themselves. What are they going to drink like? And so it's given me the sort of freedom to be more creative, you know, and have a place where you can execute an idea, which is, again, very fortunate. Like I didn't have to work at a giant winery and then quit. You know, I was able to come from this with a perspective of a New York City wine guy, kind of let loose in Disneyland, like go. And that's almost all due to Nicole and just to her trust in me. And also I think in just that sort of curiosity that you have as a wine lover to be all of a sudden given the keys to the asylum. And, you know, why not? And you just trust your own palate. If it tastes good to me, if I think it's good or it has some potential and Nicole likes it, then we'll release it. And you don't have to go through a raft of a marketing department. And
that's nice, right?
Yeah. So you can move quickly. And if it doesn't work, then no one is ever going to hear about it. You know, it'll just disappear under the moonlight outside.
The serious moonlight. Okay, so
it's opened up the door to make Nero d'Avola and amphora.
Yeah, so we were talking about
Zibibbo and amphora.
Yeah, Nero. So what was the first wine that went into the amphora? That was the Nero d'Avola?
That was the Nero, and that was probably the wine that put Brash Higgins on the map right away as someone either to be afraid of or to like.
Yeah, I was like, and who is this Brash Higgins fellow anyway?
The wine was not liked in our local market in Adelaide at all, which I expected because it was really different than your typical red. And we went to Melbourne and Sydney to sort of introduce it to that market, a little bit different expectations and different, probably broader drinking population. And and the wine was received pretty well in those other markets in Australia. And then back home, it took a few years for that sort of Nero d'Avola, the less oaked, less alcoholic style that Robert Parker championed and the Grateful Palate championed, to start looking at wines that were, a little bit more spacious, not as dense and not as fruity and not as sweet. And then Nero was, I think, a really influential wine for, as I understand it, from a lot of winemakers, especially in South Australia. It showed them the potential that we could do things, because we're not probably going to really excel in Pinot Noir maybe outside of the Adelaide Hills, like the Barossa and McLaren Vale are quite warm.
Yeah.
So what else can we start working with that we can make a little bit more, fresh, easier drinking, less oak and less alcohol? And Nero really ticked a lot of boxes right away. So that was really exciting. And then we started seeing, Grenache is now being made with a lighter hand and less alcohol. And there's a lot of beautiful old heritage Grenache vineyards that planted a long time ago.
Yeah, I do love that about it. There's so many old vine, what do you call them? Bush vines, in fact.
Yeah, the ones where the trellises collapse.
Right.
And the vines just kind of support themselves. It's and a lot of these vineyards are planted in like really interesting old sandy vineyards, and the sand.
Right, like that, sand. When I hear sand, and most in Grenache, you think Rayas, but there's only one Rayas, but there is something about sand and Grenache and sand. And you brought, like you said, you get a taste through some stuff.
Yeah.
This Grenache, like I said, is from Amador. We don't have to bump it up, but what are you finding in that compared to some of the things you drink at home?
I think Grenache has an inherent sweetness to it, almost a confectionery quality, and that's why we made a Grenache.
That's probably why I like it.
Yeah, but if you let it go too long, it can become really boozy, and alcohol escalates really quickly.
Yes.
I mean, most Grenache, at least in South Australia, was planted to make port.
Right.
So it had fortified wine as its end game. So, and in fact, a lot of it was torn out in the 80s. The government had a vine pull scheme where they wanted to remove Grenache because they were trying to introduce some more noble varieties to make still wines, table wines. And fortunately, we've learned that Grenache, if you dial it back, you can kind of approach maybe a Rayas-like elegance.
Yeah, I've said I'm famous in my own mind, but I've been saying for years, I think Pinot Noir wants to be Grenache when it grows up, because if you dial Grenache down, you'll get the flavors of like a really ripe Pinot, like, you know what I mean? Like when you turn it down, you're like, ugh, she's a beauty.
Yeah. The old adage is, Grenache delivers what Pinot promises, right?
See,
that's the T-shirt.
That's the one I'm like,
And, we all know that Pinot is very much a chameleon and a much more difficult grape probably to vinify and to grow in the vineyard. Grenache is tough. And so it does well in warm climates like Chateauneuf and McLaren Vale.
And it's vigorous. I mean, at one time it was the most planted grape in the world. Like you said, it was used in fortified wines. I mean, it, and going back to the business of wine.
Yep.
If it's hot and it can grow, doesn't need a lot of water, plant it.
Yeah.
Make money off it somehow.
Yeah.
Put it in cough syrup, whatever.
I never thought about that. But yeah, no, it's true. So now we're trying to find ways of making it that are really pretty and delicate.
Yes.
And maybe, you're finding different single vineyard sites that are either in higher altitude, or they're closer to the Adelaide Hills, or they're in sand and they have a different flavor profile. The sandy soils tend to bring out more perfume, more lacy, more kind of, maybe a little bit more fragrant qualities. Heavier soils tend to make a bit more powerful, darker styles of wine or Grenache. But it's interesting now that there's a lot of single vineyard Grenaches being bottled, and people are asking real money for them too. It's a different sort of price point, because it is our sort of foray into that, how expensive and crazy has Pinot Noir gotten?
Right.
So Grenache can sort of...
It can play in that field.
Hold its own.
Yeah. But let's flip gears. Switch gears.
Yep.
But then why'd you plant Cinsault?
Yeah, because there are already existing Grenache vineyards that we could actually, we could contract and buy fruit from. And we'd already had relationships in place with Yangara Winery, which is a gorgeous biodynamic vineyard planted in the sandy part, the Blewett Springs part of McLaren Vale, which is getting a lot of hype.
That changed. I'll tell you, a Blewett Springs Grenache from Clarendon Hills, that Australian wine collection, when I first got in the wine business, changed my world. It made Grenache like my favorite grape. I was like, what is this?
Exactly. And those were pretty powerful styles.
And those were big because that was
Yeah.
that was 90. So it was 97. So it might have been like the 96 or 95 of that wine. And it was big. I mean, it was like blue black in color. I mean, it was dense, but still, like just getting into the wine business, and there had been commercials for like EJ and Gallo white Grenache, and it goes from this like crazy sweet mass-produced wine to like this, and but this Cinsault, I've been twirling and sniffing it and twirling and sniffing it, and good Lord, man. It's like it's got like a candy apple, cinnamon, just red fruits just popping off. Kind of like the Mediterranean too, but so like, tell me about this. Is this amphora? How do you treat this wine, and how old are the vines? For all my wine geeks who are listening right now,
Cinsault is we hadn't worked with it we envisioned this being a component in a Mataro Cinsault Carignan blend, which a vineyard next to ours, a grower approached me. It's an existing vineyard. He approached us probably 8 years ago and said, "Hey, listen, I hear you guys make some weird wine. I have 3 acres of I have 3 acres of Semillon that I can't sell. We're thinking of taking it out. What would you be interested in? And if we do it, will you guarantee that you'll buy it for a long time?" Because most growers need to get paid. Obviously, most people need to get paid. But if we tell them to put in 3 really esoteric varieties and don't buy it,
you got to buy it. You got to get like a 20-year contract.
Otherwise, they'll just put in Sheeraz and hope that Treasury or one of the bigger winery companies will. Yeah. So, anyways, we said, let's try Cinsault and Carignan, and we knew Mataro or Mourvedre was already in the region and did very well. Cinsault and Carignan both had reputations for being tough, robust. Cinsault very light and more delicate, pale, and then Carignan good yield, good color, a real quintessential red wine grape, handled heat. And so off we went. And that vineyard, we could keep a close eye on it. It was not just literally next to ours, so we could monitor it. We could help farm it. We could pick it easily and bring it back. And Cinsault, I had no idea. It was a pretty heavy cropping, very pale skin, coppery almost. And we were just, obviously, you couldn't help but try to make a couple of barrels on its own just to see. And it came in, the numbers looked great. The ferments were really smooth. We pressed it fairly light because we were just working with it for the first time. And we really wanted to introduce that sort of lighter, fresh, almost chillable red element. Because who needs big reds? Like, that's no longer interesting. We have Cabernet and Shiraz, and we can do that with Mataro if we want to make more powerful reds. The trickier part where we lived was trying to make the medium-bodied, fragrant, delicate. And Cinsault had all of that DNA. It was really seemed to be perfectly suited. And we had a light touch in the winery. So ferments, we punch down twice a day, fermenting grapes. This is destemmed. So we really wanted to see what the grapes looked like without the stems because we were just learning about it. And then it's pressed pretty gently into neutral, older barrels that are going to be inert and just allow the wine to go through malo, and which is malolactic fermentation, and then try to bottle it in the same year that it's picked. So it's a kind of a summery spring fresh. Again, pop it in the esky, which is a cooler in Australia. And maybe finding a way. It's a wine that's a step up from rosé. It's in that sort of Pinot Noir camp. But it's a little bit less serious than Pinot. It's a little bit fresher. It's got that sort of cherry starburst.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was like, it tastes like a candy, and that's what it's like. I was like, it's cherry starburst.
Yeah, you need candy metaphors. It helps explain.
Oh, I'm like, and for all my brothers, says now and later. It's like actually like a cherry now and later.
Yeah, our Jolly Ranchers were always good sort of wine comparisons.
Totally.
And it's tough, and it works well where we are, and we can pick it late, and late's good because you want the winery to be.
I mean, it's ripe. I mean, so it's 14.6, but it's not hot. It's completely balanced. It's integrated.
Yep.
And it's just beautiful. It's juicy.
That's an anomaly, and when the 2021 comes over, that's coming in at 11%, and that's kind of where I think it suits.
Well, Cinsault's interesting because I've had Cinsault. I've had them at over 14.5.
Yeah.
And then I've had them like at 12.5.
Yep.
And the beauty of the fruit's there regardless.
Yep.
Regardless of where you're picking. So that's interesting that this one, was it just hotter in 2020 or just you picked later? Or what you...
2020 was warm and there was a lot of fires and
that's right. Yeah.
It was the fires. It's very apocalyptic in Australia when it wants to be. 2021 and 22.
Well, it's pretty apocalyptic everywhere in the world right now.
Yeah.
Bro, whatever you want it to be like. But yes.
But when your backyard.
But I live in California.
Yeah.
When you see a wildfire, it's the craziest thing you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah.
You feel so helpless.
Yeah. Yeah. And we haven't. I think the Adelaide Hills has more because it's more forested. McLaren Vale's been fairly cultivated, so there's not as much forest, which obviously would be more threatening in a bushfire. And we're right on the ocean, so that's kind of another way you can just run into the ocean if shit hits the fan. You can be like, I'll just. But Cinsault and Carignan and Mataro, we can pick them later, we pick them when they're normally ready, which is in our cycle of harvest usually. One of the last picks of the year. So you can have Sheeraz and Cabernet Franc and other things that we're working with, ferment, pressed, put to bed essentially, and then clear the floor, and then bring in the Cinsault and Carignan. And so it works in the rhythm of a vintage as well, because you don't want everything to hit you at once.
Right.
So finding grapes that have longer time on the vine.
It's good staggered stages.
So it's because it's just me really making the wine, and I make about 13 or 14 different wines. And so you have to sort of clear your head sometimes as well. And physically, the physical element of doing punch downs by hand, morning and night. So sometimes we can recruit maybe a couple of different, or maybe I'll find somebody who wants a worker who wants to come down for a few days when things get really heavy. Or you can invite,
I might come visit you, man.
Yeah.
I might come hang out with you.
You need to find, people.
Do I need to find an air mattress?
No, I have you should bring one anyways. But no, you should come. But I think that's part of it too. Is that it's the routine of the punch downs.
Yes.
It's once this fruit comes into the winery, you're obligated to take care of it. It's like having a child, and you can't really take your eye off it until it gets into some sort of safe place.
Right.
We're talking about being like a MASH hospital, like during harvest. You're like, okay, who's bleeding out the worst here?
Triage, exactly.
Yeah, you're okay. Let's put you, and then okay, we have a
The
problem.
bullet went right through. Relax.
Yeah.
Have a shot of morphine.
You'll be fine. This guy over here is not having a good. Yeah,
he's gonna lose limbs and might die. Sorry, did we say that out loud? No, that's awesome, man. Wow, we're like pretty much out of town. So your name is Brad Hickey. Your partner's Nicole Thorpe. Who the fuck is Brash Higgins?
Brash Higgins. That's my superhero name.
I love it. Oh, I love that.
I thought we already went over. Oh man! So Brash became, when I first started working, the pruners that I was working with, they all had nicknames, and the nicknames in Australia, people have a lot of nicknames, and it's kind of a sign of belonging if you have a good nickname. Yeah. So I was working with guys, like Knackers and Bobo and Whiskers and Bed Sores, Trigger.
Digga is a nickname. I have a friend who hangs out in Melbourne. It's like Digga for clam Digga.
Met a guy named Diesel yesterday. So Brad was kind of like a little bit boring, and then
Brad from the suburbs of Illinois.
Yeah.
Sounds like somebody in the 80s, somebody with a popped collar in an 80s John Hughes movie.
Yeah, it is. Or, like Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yes.
More likely. So, yeah, these guys eventually, when they warmed up to me, their initial nickname was Seppo, which is septic tank.
Oh, wow.
Which is Cockney rhyming slang for yank, and which is not very nice to be called a septic tank.
Wow, they're like shithead. They should just call you shithead.
I know, but I could understand them after a while. I could start to, I could start to figure out these thick accents, and when they're obviously just hanging out drinking beer around a fire, it's really a lot of colloquialisms. Yeah. And I was like, okay, I get the Seppo thing, thanks, but come on. And then after another week or so of proving myself a little bit and kind of weathering the storms and the rain and drinking stout by the fire after pruning, the name Brash was born as the Brash New Yorker.
Love it.
And it stuck. And then I was like, cool, I've got a good nickname. And it made me feel welcome to the community, which was big because, you're on the other side of the world, and it helps to have some encouraging words. And Brash was really sweet because it meant that they liked me enough
to give you a nickname.
To not call me septic tank.
Yeah. All right, man. So we're going to wrap up here.
That's a good way to end it.
No, we got two more things. We're going to play a little game called FMK. Fuck, marry, kill. I'll give you 3 grapes. You get to fuck one, you get to marry one, you got to kill one.
Oh God.
Yes. So we're gonna do Nero, Cinsault, and I'm just gonna throw a wild card here. Grenache. Who you fucking? Who you marrying? Who you killing?
Definitely fucking Cinsault. Geez, all three of them. Honestly, I would probably marry Grenache because she is proven to be
Like you could fuck the grape before you kill it.
Grenache has shown like the most sort of, I suppose, longevity. So that might be the good solid one to build a family around the marriage with the Grenache. The Cinsault, I think, is very flirtatious and probably a good time in
I'm in love with her right now.
The tops down, credit card waving in the air, hair blowing, and that's probably the effable one. And then, I couldn't kill Nero because I sort of built my whole business around it. So I might kill Zibibbo one day.
Okay, there you go. I like that. There you go. You're like, Zibibbo might have to go. Although it's very good. Don't do that. You should have said, I was going to give you Nebbiolo, but you already said you're not fucking with it. So
that's more of just respect.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Like Nebbiolo and Pinot Noir, I'm just like, we make a Chardonnay, and it's very much a wine called Bloom, which is a very sort of Vin Jaune application. So it's
we didn't even get to that. So you know what? You get to come
world.
back. Boom. And what are you most excited about in the future of yourself, Brash Higgins, whatever, the world of wine? What are you most excited about?
We love traveling. I think that's been the real excitement, is opening up some international markets from Japan to Copenhagen to London to Bangkok. That's always exciting to find good partnerships and be able to travel. I think for the most part, we really want to just sort of make sure that of the 12 or 13 wines that I'm making, that I stay on top of those, because it's complicated, as you know, to try to keep the level of your winery at the highest possible level.
Sure. And there's only a certain amount of wine that you can make, and you say you have like 14 SKUs. There's only a certain amount where you can touch every barrel. So I understand the struggle you have. It's real.
I mean, a lot of them are maybe 100 case, 200 case production too. So it's not out of the question. But and I think that's part of the rush too, is to be able to help introduce the world to Australian wines in a different capacity than maybe 20 years ago. That there is a sort of an insurgence of innovation and progressive winemakers, and there's just so many people and friends of ours that we want to get the word out about. And I think now, being slightly, I wouldn't say a senior spokesman, but someone who's been through a dozen vintages, that we can be a bit of a leader and help introduce the rest of the world to some really cool wines that probably aren't getting a lot of attention. So hopefully that's something I can do as well.
Well, I would just say, man, thank you so much for being here. And if you've done 12 vintages, you have put in your proverbial 10,000 hours. So you know what you're talking about with fine authority. Hey, Brad, tell people how they can find you, how they can be a part of what you're doing with Brash Higgins.
I'm pretty active on Instagram at Brash Higgins. Online, brashhiggins.com is a way to kind of dig deeper into the story and see more about the wines in themselves. Most of the wines we make have interesting stories that we kind of elaborate on the website. Not very active on Twitter, but that's okay.
Yeah, it's fine. For all you listeners out there, don't forget to check out the show notes for each episode. That's where we will post. I'll post the links in his socials. The wines we had today, not the wines he brought in, but they were dope. And other cool things we discussed in the episode. And until the next times, cheers to the Mavericks, the philosophers, the deep thinkers, and all you wine drinkers. It's your boy MJ. Peace.